Welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and today I'm letting Anthony off the leash. He is off the chain, even. He is dropping fat beats. He is dropping some thin Lizzies. He is beeping and bopping. Yeah. Anthony, help me out. What's some other cool rap lyric things?
I don't know, but fun fact for our viewers, this is how we talk off the air all the time.
It is, actually. I like to keep a verisimilitude in my life and my art.
It's true. And by it's true, I mean it's not. But
You kidding?
hi
I do
everyone,
talk like this.
but only in a postmodern ironic way.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've been seeing a lot of arguments lately. This is completely off topic, but this whole conversation amuses me now. About they've been referring to what they used to call in the airplane movie talking jive, like as ebonics.
Yes,
And then they're going like, no, it really has like its own grammar and whatever. And it's like
it does.
that's like I believe it, but also it's like it sounds to me like this is something you don't really care about, and you're just saying because you want to sound smarter than you are. There's a proper way of speaking.
I mean, there is, but it's about local dialects and crap. Uh,
Yep, yep,
you
that's
know,
true. I
like
like I'll give it credit as like it is a local dialect, but also there's a time and place. And when your time and place too is like inner city ghetto, that's not really something you should be proud of.
Anthony, you're hurting me. I grew up on the streets, or more accurately, scared of the streets outside my front door.
Yeah, I know you did. Uh, I am aware, by the way. Like, believe me, we here at Superversive Sci-Fi are aware that we are touching dangerously close to very touchy racial issues. We also don't care because we're sane human beings who are willing to have conversations about this without being worried that we've accidentally stepped in a minefield. Like, if I'm saying something wrong, I'm sure it will be corrected and educated at some point or not. Just like every other thing everyone says, race isn't some sort of super special uh topic that like has different rules and everything else.
Mm, spoken like a man grew up in the suburbs, who doesn't know what it's like to survive on these here streets.
I
You don't know
mean,
what I've gone through. You don't know what I
no,
am
but I
now.
don't really know what that has to do with it either.
All right. So, the real reason we're all together here is because I was uninspired and Anthony wanted to talk about The Chosen. And no, we're not talking about the Presbyterians, the Frozen Chosen, but rather the show, The Chosen. Yeah,
Yep, yep.
and I will remind everyone, and especially Anthony, that I have not seen this show, so I'm not actually very conversant on it. But I'm more than willing to, sit there and look pretty for means of the show and entertainment.
Spoiler warning, the main character dies.
Anthony, Anthony. Yeah, he does though, but
I mean,
not
I'm
for
just making
long. Spoilers.
yeah, I'm just making a prediction to be fair. We're not there yet. So, for those who don't know, The Chosen is a show about the life of Jesus Christ. Uh, uh, it is a. It's not a movie. So the difference between this and past portrayals of Christ is that it is a show. It is not a movie. So it is not. It's not trying to cover the highlights in 2 hours or whatever. I believe that the creator Dallas Jenkins and the showrunner Megabuster Shepherd says, "I do not watch television anymore."
Good man.
Uh, good man, but I unironically, yeah, we'll talk about it. I unironically recommend this. With that said, you are right not to, but Anyway,
It is the second best Jesus show next to Rick and Morty.
yes. Uh, that's worth bringing up just to piss people off.
Yeah.
So,
Anyway, keep going.
yeah.
We're not going to explain anything.
Nope. Rick and Morty, the best Jesus show. Anyway, so The Chosen is a multi-season show about the life of Jesus Christ. What makes it different from past portrayals is that it is a full show. Dallas Jenkins, the creator, said he wanted 7 seasons. So we are currently nearing the end of season 3 of the show. And I have been watching it, I got into it after sometime in the middle, I think, or near the end of season 2. Either near the end of season 2 or after season 2 before season 3 came out. I binged through the show and I absolutely loved it. I was extremely impressed by basically everything to do with the show. By the production values were much better than I expected. The acting was much, much better than I expected. Like, I'll be frank here, with these sorts of faith-based shows, my expectations are very low. I thought, maybe there's something of value in this, but I didn't think it would, actually be particularly great. Part of the issue is one simply of practicality, I guess. Like, how do you find people who are good actors who are willing to do a show like The Chosen? And The Chosen, to be clear, is not Hollywood. There is no production company backing it. They are very open about this and very proud of this. They were crowdfunded. The Chosen is crowdfunded to the tune of millions of dollars. So that's how they pay for everything. And it is, I would say, I haven't watched, all of these biblical epics. I haven't seen King of Kings or Jesus of Nazareth, like the old ones, but I have seen the Ten Commandments. I have seen Prince of Egypt, which is both good films. Megabuster Shepherd says third best Jesus show is Friendship is Magic based. Anyway, I have seen the Ten Commandments. I have seen Prince of Egypt. I don't think I've seen all of Passion of the Christ, but those Ten Commandments is generally considered, and I would agree with this, like the gold standard among Hollywood films, and I do think it's a great movie. I think Prince of Egypt is a good movie. I think The Chosen, straight up, is better than both of them. So, here's the deal. There's this whole thing, it's we're gonna be objective and cut through, all of the praise and all of the criticism and try and, give an assessment of the show that is balanced. You are not going to get that from me, because, quite frankly, my honest assessment of the show is that it is outstanding.
Yeah. That's what everyone says. I haven't actually seen the show, fair warning. I just approve of all Jesus-based media that isn't blasphemous.
Yeah, there are some the controversies are pretty nothing burger, to be honest. First off, there is, as far as I can see, no controversy involving, what you would expect, by which I mean either monetary or sexual, right?
Right.
So as far as I can see, Dallas Jenkins has never been accused of, mishandling funds or anything like that, who, again, the showrunner. And there is nothing coming out about, he's secretly been having an affair, secretly been abusing kids, or, he has a double life. I would not be surprised if that came out one day, not because of Dallas Jenkins, as far as I could tell, he seems like a nice guy to me, but because the devil loves to get in that way, try and discredit these sorts of media.
Mm-hmm.
This is exactly what happened with Mel Gibson in The Passion of the Christ. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I am totally convinced that the reason that Mel Gibson's career got tanked so hard after that was explicitly because of the fact that Passion of the Christ was such a success. But whatever. The reason I brought up those other faith-based adaptations, that I think The Chosen is the best that I have seen of direct biblical adaptation. So comparing it to Prince of Egypt and the Ten Commandments, and which are the Ten Commandments being what I would consider the former gold standard, I think The Chosen, I would argue it is better. Now, is it better partially for reasons that aren't really fair? Like it has more time to tell its story? Well, yes and no. That's part of the appeal, right? That's one. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why it's better, and they're doing it. Uh, so there is that. There's the main controversy that I've seen surrounding The Chosen in terms of issues, I guess, like with the show and with its portrayal, is that it's like crypto Mormon.
No.
So the reason behind this seems to be as follows: the Mormon Church does support The Chosen, uh, and this is true. They do. Like that. This is undeniable. They definitely are giving them a lot of monetary support, and they are allowing them to film in the Utah desert on Mormon property. And this is important because it allows the desert scenes of Israel and Galilee and them to look at least somewhat realistic
Yeah.
ish. So it does a lot for the production values of the show. The fact that the Mormon Church is helping them here, and they give a lot of money, and they're openly supportive of the show. Uh, this has led to, and I think with some fairness, people getting suspicious of what is the agenda of the show. Now, I don't think it's unfair to say, like, where's your money coming from? Should we be on the lookout for that? Right? Like,
Yeah.
I would agree with that. However, speaking as an educated Catholic, somebody who, knows his stuff, knows his Christology and whatever, who has watched the show, I will say that I find the arguments that the show is secretly crypto Mormon to be laughable. No, I have not seen any of the multiple YouTube videos on why it's crypto Mormon. I've seen the show itself, however. Like I watched the show, and I will tell you that it is not crypto Mormon. Like, uh, Jesus's portrayal. If there is a criticism that I think is somewhat fair, there are multiple criticisms that are fair. Like nothing is perfect. At least nothing of this level of ambition,
Right.
right, is going to be perfect. Uh, so I've seen people say that they think that it maybe emphasizes Jesus' humanity too much at the expense of his godhood. This is a balance that I think is always going to be difficult to get because
Yep.
Jesus is literally a unique person in all of history. He is the true God and the true man, and push one side over another at your peril,
Yep.
right? Like, you're telling a long form story and you're going to try and bring out the relationships between the characters. You're going to want Jesus looking, right? You
Right.
want Jesus interacting with them in a sort of understandable way. So that's where I do think that there is some fairness to the critique. However, just speaking from my perspective, I don't think that they are undermining Jesus's divinity. So I'll tell you the things though that really impressed me about the show. More like the level of detail put into like the research that they've done really impresses me. This was the first one for me that made me sit up and notice like just how impressive it was. So there is a famous thing Jesus says throughout the Gospels. He calls himself the Son of Man, right? It's a title that Jesus gives. So Jesus gives to himself, I should say. Uh, so one thing that a lot of people don't realize, you'll often see in like commentaries on this, Son of Man contrasted with Son of God. Like Jesus is the Son of God, and he calls himself the Son of Man to emphasize his humanity. But this is actually wrong. And the reason that this is wrong is that Son of Man is actually a title that comes from the book of Daniel. And it is a divine title that is used in the book of Daniel, I believe, to describe the Ancient of Days. Now, the book of Daniel is, for many reasons, one of the most important books of the Old Testament, I think, in ways that people don't always understand. And the reason that I say this is that so many of the themes and topics that Jesus talks about come from the book of Daniel, like the kingdom of God. It's pretty much not mentioned anywhere in the Old Testament but the book of Daniel, right?
Yep.
The prophecy that the Messiah would come in the first era of the Roman Empire, that comes straight from the book of Daniel. And there's even more to it than that. Like Brant Petra points out in his book, The Case for Jesus, that in the book of Daniel, if you use the calculations that Jews were using as standard at the time, of the first century, for like when the Messiah would come, Jesus fulfills the dating of the prophecies down to the year. Like it is that exact, the fulfillment of prophecy. So the book of Daniel is a very, very important book. One underrated reason it is important is actually that the book of Daniel is arguably the only book in the entire Old Testament that is presents a view of God that is not entirely Unitarian. It's not completely Trinitarian either, because the Holy Spirit doesn't really come up in the book of Daniel. However, in some of his views, when he talks about the Messiah, Daniel makes it seem as if the Messiah is on the level of God, right? Like
Yeah.
receiving worship equal to God, which makes this an extremely important book when we're discussing Jesus. And one of the titles he uses is One Who Is Like a Son of Man. So this is, in the context of the book of Daniel, not a title referring to his humanity, but a divine title referring to his divinity. So when Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man in the New Testament, he's not saying that he is a human just like us. He is referring to himself as divine. And what impressed me about The Chosen is when he refers to himself as the Son of Man, the Pharisees see this and overhear it, and they go to complain. And they actually say in a line of dialogue, he referred to himself as the Son of Man. That's a divine title from the book of Daniel. And I was kind of blown away. That is something that is very often missed. And I'm not going to give myself like credit for spotting this or anything. Like I saw I forget, I think it was an interview on Gospel Simplicity where a professor who was a theologian of a New Testament theologian was talking about this. So it's not as if it's something that I spotted and was like, it's just I happened to know it because I had seen that interview, and I was really, really impressed that they caught that. And this level of detail extends to pretty much everything about the show. There are disputes that various rabbis are having in the show that I, as somebody who is interested in, the first century and what was going on in that era, like the disputes that they're talking about, they bring up kind of in passing, but they are real disputes among real rabbis. Essentially, the dispute was between one rabbi wanted to interpret the law in a very strict and legalistic way, and one rabbi wanted to interpret the law in a very loose and almost metaphorical way. And this dispute was going on in early first century Judaism. Jesus actually comes in and kind of cuts through it by being even more strict than the strict rabbi in his interpretation of the law. People are saying, like, when should we get divorced? And Jesus is saying never, right? Like, and this is kind of blowing people's mind at the
Based.
time.
Who knew Jesus could be so based? Not
Yeah,
I.
based. Uh, but this is, you know, what is murder? And he's going like, no, you murdered someone if you have hatred for them in your heart. Like, you have lust if you look at a woman, or you commit adultery if you look at a woman with lust in your heart. So Jesus is kind of cuts through this by being even more strict in his interpretation, while at the same time saying, in a very mysterious way that, like, these are not laws that you need to follow anymore. But at the same time, these other laws are laws that you've been way too lax on. What Jesus is actually doing is saying that we have no need for the law of Moses anymore. Now we must follow the natural law in a way that is perfect, like our Heavenly Father is perfect, whatever. Uh, this is, all pretty standard Christian theology if you look into it in any depth. And the point I'm making is that they get this dispute among the rabbis correct. It becomes a plot point in one of the episodes as they're trying to, like, play rabbis off of each other. And I'm like, I recognize that dispute. That's a real dispute that they're discussing. I was really impressed by this. The most recent, so season 3 just came out, and again, this is going to be a 7-season show. I am really hoping they get to Acts of the Apostles, because Acts of the Apostles is a fascinating book, but whatever. Right now, we're in season 3 of the show, And in season 3 of the show, they had probably the 2 best episodes of the entire show, what they called Clean, Part 1 and Part 2. So here's something that you might know, but you might have forgotten because, it slipped your mind and you don't normally think about these things together. The healing of the woman with the hemorrhage and the healing of Jairus' daughter, or the resurrection of Jairus' daughter, uh, actually happened back to back in the Gospels. A lot of people, I don't want to say, like, don't know this, but a lot of people just forget this. Like, I forgot it. I forgot that they were back to back like that. I knew about both events. I just didn't realize that they were that closely connected.
Yeah.
But they are. They're like one immediately right after the other. In fact, Jairus runs up to Jesus, and Jesus is walking over to Jairus' house surrounded by crowds when the woman with the hemorrhage touches his cloak, right?
Yep.
So, what The Chosen does with this, I think, was another thing that was really impressive, because you could gather from the title of the episodes, Clean Part 1 and Part 2, like, you get the question of why were these 2 events put together? Now, obviously, one answer is, well, just because it happened to happen that way, but no, Jesus is doing everything with a purpose, right? God's planned all of this from the beginning of time. Why did he put these events so close together? And there does not seem to be an obvious connection, but there actually is. There is a connection here, although the Gospels don't explicitly put it this way. The connection is clear if you think for a moment about first century Judaism. The woman with the hemorrhage. So, let's give you a little summary of the gospel story. She had this hemorrhage for 12 years. I've also heard it called like the bleeding woman. The woman with the hemorrhage, right? She has been bleeding nonstop for 12 years. And she touches Jesus' cloak. He feels power go out of him. Which, by the way, is a very interesting passage itself, because it places the power explicitly in Jesus, which is another divine sign, just for the record. But anyway, like, he's not calling on the Father, the power goes out of him. But anyway, she touches the cloak of Jesus and is healed. And that's pretty much all we hear about the woman with the hemorrhage. He does tell her, your faith has saved you, I believe. It wasn't you touching the cloak, it was your faith that saved you. Which is also what he tells Jairus. So that's one connection, right? The connection of it is the faith of Jairus and the faith of the woman with the hemorrhage that has healed them. Right? That's a very explicit connection. But there's another connection here that isn't as explicit. And that's that the woman with the hemorrhage, if you were bleeding, if you were on your period, essentially, if you were bleeding in first century Israel, you were unclean. You could not be in society if you were bleeding. You had to separate yourself, right? You couldn't touch people. They would have, if you touched someone else, they had to separate themselves, right? The woman with the hemorrhage was unclean. Now, what else makes you unclean? Touching a dead body.
Oh, yes.
What was your comment?
Sin.
Sin. Well, kind of, but we're talking. Actually, I would argue no, because we're talking about ritual cleanliness, which isn't necessarily related to personal sin. That's an important distinction that needs to be made. Is that, a woman on her period wasn't considered to be someone who was sinning. But she couldn't be in society. That means that for 12 years she was essentially like on her own. And The Chosen notices this. Like, this is a major plot point, that she's basically like living on her own, that if people see her bleeding, she's like shunned, she can't go near them. And the Pharisee first sees who is like following them, watching Jesus. First sees Jesus heal this woman, and Jesus tells him, like, that woman's unclean. He looks at them and goes, no, she's clean. Like, she's not unclean anymore. She is clean. And the same thing. He touches Jairus' daughter, and he raises her to life. Little child, I say to you, arise. And he's like, you touched a dead body. And Jesus is like, she's not dead. Yeah. I did nothing of, basically prove it. And he throws down the gauntlet.
Yeah.
So, this is something important, an important thread between the two of them. Jesus does something that would be considered ritually unclean, but because he is the Messiah and the Son of God, uh, these rules no longer apply to him. You know, he could touch the bleeding woman because he can stop the bleeding. You can't stop the bleeding. Jesus can stop the bleeding. He can touch the dead body because he has power over life and death. He can bring it back to life. You can't do that. Jesus can do that. So, the fact that they grasped this distinction and they made it like a central point of the episode, that what is the connection between these two events, that they were both unclean, and this is why they're put back to back like that in the gospel, and this is why Jesus performed them one right after the other like that, you know, to prove that the Jewish law that he was the sovereign over the Jewish law, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Jewish law was not, you know, he was not subject to the Jewish law. The Jewish law was subject to him. That's the point of putting those stories together like that. And the Chosen grasped this, despite the fact that the Gospels don't explicitly point this out. That really impressed me. Uh, it's just, yeah, it's a really good show. One thing that they do too is the apostles, you know, with the extra time, what are you going to spend it on? Well, it's called The Chosen. Jesus isn't really, I would argue, the main character of the story. The main character of the story, I think, would be split between Simon Peter. He's not Peter yet in the story, but Simon and Matthew. Now, Matthew barely actually appears in the Gospels. If you read the Gospels, Matthew is mentioned pretty much in passing, right?
Yeah.
But they make the choice to sort of make Matthew one of the viewpoint characters of the show. One interesting decision that they make with Matthew is they decided to portray Matthew as autistic. And like Dallas Jenkins, it's not just right, sometimes it shows like with Sherlock where they go, oh, Sherlock's clearly autistic, or this character is coded autistic. No, like he's not being coded autistic. He is autistic. Like it's very, very clear. You know. And Dallas Jenkins and the Chosen cast has been very clear that like, yeah, he's autistic. The goal of what they're doing. But it's done in a really clever way, I think, because you sort of have a problem with Matthew, which is that and I mean from a narrative perspective, obviously, right? Like, from a writing perspective, you're gonna make Matthew a character, and you sort of have a problem with him, which is that what Matthew is doing as a tax collector is actually horrible. Uh, right? Like,
Yeah.
Matthew is a horrible person.
Yeah.
Uh, the what the tax collectors were sort of the equivalent of like Nazi collaborators in World War II. Like, and that is the status that he had in society. This is why it was so absolutely shocking to people that Jesus would be eating with tax collectors. It wasn't just that they were uh like it was not just that they were taking money from people. You know, we don't like tax collectors now, right? But we don't look at them as like, you know, uh, except when we're being tongue in cheek among friends, we don't really look at them as like evil. They're doing a job, right? But no, tax collectors were working with the Roman government who were persecuting the Jews. You know, like this made them traitors. And that's Matthew. So how do you make Matthew likable? Well, I think the idea of making him autistic is actually a really clever way around this issue. Because you need to make a fine line here. It's like, why is Matthew a tax collector? Well, they emphasize he's sitting in a little booth behind a little cage, right? With a Roman guard following him everywhere. So he only needs to interact with people in very controlled circumstances, right? And he can live an affluent life. Uh, However, the fact that he has this issue interacting with people makes him very endearing. You know, his family disowns him. He mentions that he has trouble understanding the metaphorical passages and like in scripture. You know, Solomon's writings and things like that, right? Uh,
Yep.
and he mentions that this makes him endearing. Like, you're automatically endeared to Matthew because you feel bad for the guy. Like, he clearly, in a world nowadays, we're more aware of autism as well, and even more than that, we're a world where you can make a niche for yourself without, intellectually, when that was less of the case at the time. Uh, but there's something to the idea of like seeing him, struggling to interact with people, knowing why he did it, that makes him endearing. But one thing I think the show does extremely well is Matthew's actions are never excused as a result of this. Like, never. Peter is, or Simon Peter, I should say. Simon at the moment. Simon is furious with Matthew. Because Matthew was in the story, they make Matthew his tax collector, which I think is a smart idea, narratively, right? So he is furious that Matthew has joined them, and he makes it clear like that he doesn't forgive him. He says we're Jews, their whole lot is to suffer, and this is like basically all we had is that we suffered with each other, we suffered together, knowing that we were chosen, and you spit on that and you betrayed that and you join with our enemies. And Peter is completely correct. And one thing that I like about the show is that they are very clear that, yeah, Peter is right. Like, I'm going to refer to him as Peter because Simon the Zealot is also in the show, so it's easier to separate the two. Uh, they make it very clear that he is completely correct about Matthew. That what he's saying about Matthew is like Matthew doesn't really have a response to this,
Yep.
nor should he. He's like, yeah, you're right. And however, what they do show is that there's a little plot point where Mary Magdalene goes back. He finds her. The backstory of Mary Magdalene, this I believe, is that she was an alcoholic because she had been raped by a Roman soldier. Although they make that kind of implied rather than stated, but she had been raped by a Roman soldier, and this drove her to alcoholism, and she had been shunned by her family until Jesus found her. And she goes back into, like, the world and goes back and starts drinking again, and they have to find her and bring her back. So they show that Matthew has this empathy for Mary Magdalene that even Peter doesn't really know what to say, and Matthew is willing to do it to show that Matthew has changed because of his association with Jesus. But notably, he doesn't have any excuse for what he did. He just needs to show that he's different now. He's not the same now. There's a really moving scene in season 3 where he reconciles with his family. It's exactly what you expect it to be, but it's very well done. It's very heartwarming. I'm sure if you've seen any sort of reconciliation scene in any show, it's exactly what you would expect, but it's good. Lots of things like that. I really enjoy the way that they use these characters. I'll even go into, like, I think that the best actor of the group is the guy who plays Peter, because Peter is arguably the most vivid character in the Gospels, outside of Jesus. I mean, Jesus himself comes across as a very, very alive in the Gospels, but Peter does as well. And really in the Gospels and Acts of the Apostles in the New Testament, right? Peter comes across as having a very distinct personality. He's a man of contradictions. He throws himself wholeheartedly into the faith, but at the same time, he is prone to very quick changes in emotion and rash judgments, right?
Yep.
He's very human. Well, so that makes him a difficult character to play. You have to get across this character of contradictory passions, kind of, and portray him as one person. And they start off the show with choices that I thought were kind of weird, where they make it that Peter owes so much debt to Matthew that he agrees to be a spy for the Romans, but he's lying. Like, he's just trying to get them not to pay his debt, and he tries to mislead them. So I was kind of like, this is kind of weird to me. It's like, I understand Peter's a flawed human being, but like, this is a little too far for me in terms of like changing the character. But they end it, I think, in a really clever way. So Peter can't bring himself to actually betray anyone. He tells his family and his friends that he's been a spy for the Romans, that he's not going to do it, and now he's probably going to get arrested and quite possibly executed, you know, for not being able to pay his debts. So his friends decide they're going to go out with him and fish with him one last night, and they get nothing. And then what follows this is the famous miracle, right? The miracle
Yeah.
of the fit. Uh, where where he says, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man." And Jesus says, "I will make you fishers of men." Well, the the way that The Chosen does this, by setting up all of this backstory before we get to the scene, and now, like, the miraculous catch of fish is, of course, what allows Peter to pay his debts, so he doesn't go to jail. Uh, it it adds so much to the scene, because you see Peter drop to his knees and say, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man." And in a way that in the gospel you don't really know, like, the build up to the situation, right?
Yeah.
It's a very moving moment in the gospel as well, in my opinion, at least. Yeah, because I feel like Peter's reaction is a very natural reaction. You're confronted with, the God of the universe, who's just performed an incredible miracle in front of you, and all of a sudden you're hit with how small and how weak you are, right? It's a
Yes.
beautiful scene in the gospel as well, but in the show, I think by doing all of this, I think of how to put it.
I just think, such a miracle. Paying taxes.
Yeah, I get your point, but I
I
think that the idea of,
yeah.
like, setting up that it's not so much setting up that there was a purpose to the miracle, that you didn't really need. It's more setting up that why Peter would react that way. Like,
Right.
Peter is a deeply flawed human being, right?
Yes.
He was lying to his wife, he was lying to his friends, but he's not a monster. Ultimately he wouldn't betray them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet, now he's been given a miracle that, as far as he could tell, like, he did not deserve this. He didn't, his original reaction, both in the Gospels and in the show, because the show was just transcribing the Gospels, like, "I don't know who you are," basically. He's like, "But you can, go ahead, use my boat," right?
Mm-hmm.
And he has done nothing to demonstrate that he is loyal to Jesus or anything like that. And yet Jesus performs this powerful miracle in front of him. So I feel like it really adds some weight to him saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man," because like, what he's referring to, in a
Yes.
way that you don't know in the Gospels. Like, it makes sense. You can imagine any number of things. I can imagine myself saying that for reasons that are completely different. But
Yes.
now you actually know, and that's the benefit of having a long form show to flesh these sorts of things out. So, yeah, I am very impressed with it. It's not perfect. I think that the dialogue is mostly excellent. However, some moments come across as more didactic than others. Like, they have a whole subplot with the women of Jesus who follow him. Now, in the Gospels, there is a contingent of women who, it is not directly stated, but is pretty heavily, like, implied, if you read between the lines, are following Jesus around, with Mary Magdalene among them as one of the leaders, and probably Mary, the mother of Jesus, following for much of the time, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and so don't get me wrong, they did not make this up completely. Like, this is a thing that is at least implied in the Gospels. This group of women that are following Jesus around. Uh, However, I do think that, like, in the early seasons at least, they were making them almost like they were pseudo apostles, which I thought was a little bit strange, and probably a bit of modern thought
Yeah.
creeping in. Uh, it wasn't, like, jarring, and when it was, between sticking with what the gospel said or making a feminist point, they stuck with what the gospel said, right? Like,
Yes.
when Jesus sends the apostles out two by two, he leaves the women behind, and the women are just left behind. They
Mm-hmm.
they don't add anything to that, but I did notice it. like Mary Magdalene's role, I understand the idea of like you want to give larger roles to women, just for the sake of you're running a long show, like let's give women something to watch, right? A character to relate to, sort of. But I don't think they really knew what to do with her as a character. The portrayal of Mary, Mother of Jesus, was very interesting. So let me talk about it from the Catholic perspective. So, obviously, Dallas Jenkins is an evangelical. He's open about being an evangelical. However, he has stated several times he is very aware that people of various Christian traditions watch the show, and his goal is not to make an evangelical show. It's just to make an adaptation of the Gospels, right? Like, and he seems to be sincere in this. Like the guy who plays Jesus, Jonathan Rumi, is a Catholic, who was just at the March for Life, by the way. So good for that guy.
Nice.
But anyway, like the guy who plays Jesus is a Catholic. Uh, the team at The Chosen, like they went on the Catholic prayer app Hallow, and they read prayers on there, and so I believe Dallas Jenkins when he says, like, I'm not here to push a particular theological agenda. I'm trying to adapt the Gospels as best I know how. I am an evangelical, but that's not the point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the right way to go. Like, I would say that if we were Catholic as well. It's like, the goal is not to create a thing like, and then Peter established it, and then Peter declared himself Pope. Like, that's, not not an honest way of doing things. So I appreciate that he does seem to be doing things in an honest way, right?
Right.
Now, Mary, the Mother of God, it's pretty funny. There was a Chosen Christmas special, uh, and in the Chosen Christmas special, Mary is shown giving birth to Jesus, and she has labor pains. Now, it is a small T tradition, though a very ancient one, that Mary did not have labor pains when she was giving birth to Christ because of in the Catholic Church, I should say, because of the Immaculate Conception. This was never defined in any councils or anything, and I assume the reason it was not defined is because whether she experienced labor pains isn't really relevant so much as whether or not the Immaculate Conception is real. So if you've defined the Immaculate Conception, then like I don't know, maybe the labor pains thing follows. Who knows? Uh, but it is an old tradition, and it was really funny watching him talking about this. He said, I did not know this when I wrote this episode, but I certainly learned afterward because I got a lot of Orthodox and Catholics, very angry Orthodox and Catholics writing in and swearing off of the show. He's like, look, man, he's like, I don't know what to tell you. I'm not Catholic, and I've never heard that before. It's like, this was all new to me. It amused me. I think from the Catholic perspective, you need to recognize that you are not watching a Catholic show. They're not going to share the Catholic assumptions about people like Mary. With that said, I actually do like the portrayal of Mary as a character in her own right in the show. She is clearly not portrayed in the Catholic way, and I don't think it's fair to expect them to, an evangelical show to portray Mary in the Catholic way. That's a step too far. That's asking for things that they never promised, right? Like, I, I don't think that that's a legitimate. That is a fair criticism. With that said, I think the portrayal of Mary we do get is quite good. First, I like the actress who plays her. I think she does a good job in the role. I also like that she does play a role in the story. There is a wonderful, moving scene that's not. This is one of their, quote unquote, original scenes. Like, this is by the Bible fan fiction sections, right? It's not in the Gospels. But it is an argument that all of the apostles are having. And earlier in the episode, Mary had mentioned that, she remembered Jesus' birth and when she had to wipe Jesus down and clean him, and that Jesus depended on her. But now that he was an adult, she mentions that she's like, I'm not really sure, what I'm supposed to do because he has this mission and I don't know how I can contribute. But, you know, like I want to. I want to be there for him, but I don't know how. It's a nice moment. And later, the apostles are arguing, right? and
Mm-hmm.
they're having an argument over Matthew. This is the scene I mentioned earlier that Peter is calling out Matthew for joining with the group when he was a former tax collector, saying he's like, you never, you didn't even say you were sorry. Not that I would forgive you anyway, even if you did, but you didn't. And he's like, and I'm never gonna forgive you. And the apostles look as if they're about to come to blows over this. And then Jesus, who has been out for like the past several days praying and fasting, comes stumbling in, and his feet are bloody. And it's implied, like, I think that he's been performing miracles like all day while the apostles are here. And he stumbles into his tent, and all of the apostles see him and they stop their arguing. And Mary rushes over with food and drink and sits him down and helps him. And I thought that was a really moving scene and a very clever scene too. It's like all of your petty arguments are happening, and then, here is Jesus doing the actual work, right? And here is Mary doing the only thing that is worth a damn, which is she is the only one who ran up and actually helped Jesus when she saw him. Right? Nobody else moved. They
Yep.
were all too surprised. I thought that was a really moving scene, a really well done scene, and I really like that portrayal of Mary. There is a certain Catholicity to the idea of like, and then Mary's role is to show us that the proper thing to do, which is serve Jesus,
Yes.
right? So
And
I, I
just to be
appreciate.
hold on, just to be clear though, like that is perfect. Like having Mary helping with Jesus's
Oh
ministry,
yeah,
like does not counter anything. Like it is perfectly reasonable
no, I'm not
that
implying that it would.
no,
Like,
no, no, and I wasn't, yeah, yeah. Well, I'm just saying that like this is something that every part of Christianity can agree on with ease that Mary was, helping Jesus. Like it's, reasonable.
yeah, absolutely. Like, I'm not implying like he's like, and then he had the secret crypto Catholic method. That message, that wasn't my point.
Mm.
I just thought that it was a very nice scene, and it also kind of gets to like, you know, sort of, I guess, the role of Mary. And I do think that if you asked Dallas Jenkins, he probably did have something like that in mind. Not that he was, he's not portraying Mary as immaculate or anything like that. And I'm not claiming that he is, but I do think that he would be like, yeah, we want to make sure that we're portraying Mary in a respectful way, right? And I think he did. Like, I will give him some credit for that.
Yep.
Uh, one of the controversial scenes in The Chosen was, if you recall the incident in the gospel where he preaches in Capernaum,
Mm-hmm.
and he says, a prophet's never welcomed in his hometown, and he's driven out of town, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Is
they
that
have that scene in The Chosen, and this ended up being one of the more controversial scenes because they added a line that wasn't in the Bible, that people claimed was in the Book of Mormon. Now, for the record, the line they're referring to, number one, was not in the Book of Mormon. Like, there is a line that's sort of similar-ish to it in the Book of Mormon, but it was not word for word in the Book of Mormon. And number two, I would argue is theologically accurate. So the scene is this. He has preached, in the synagogue, the rabbi is stunned at what he's just said, that he's just preached blasphemy, right?
mm-hmm.
And they said he says something to him, and it's actually like this is a really good intense scene where he goes like, what of the law of Moses? And Jesus looks at him and says, I am the law of Moses. Now, they play this for proper dramatic effect in The Chosen. Everybody gasps. There's a musical sting, you know,
Right, right.
and they should, because that's a really, really, like, for a Jew, that is a shocking line. But it is true. Jesus doesn't actually ever say that in the Bible. Like,
Right.
he never calls himself the law of Moses. I would argue, though, it's theologically accurate for the, very simple, logical syllogism. Jesus calls himself the Word, or I should say, John calls Jesus the Word.
Right.
The law of Moses is in the Torah; it's part of the Word. So Jesus is in that very real sense the law of Moses. Also, Jesus has the ability to contravene or to override the law of Moses as he sees fit. He has authority over it, which is established later in the healing of the woman with the hemorrhage and the raising of Jairus' daughter from the dead, which was discussed earlier. So I don't have a theological problem with it. Also, from a narrative perspective, I think it did its job very well. It was I think they portrayed it with the proper gravitas. Like that is a gasp worthy line.
Yeah.
Uh and it is. And they portrayed it that way. It's a great, very dramatic scene. They're going to kill Jesus, and they like surround him at a cliff, and they go, "You're gonna be killed for blasphemy. What do you have to say?" And Jesus goes like, "You're not gonna kill me. I'm not done with my mission." And he's like, "I'm leaving now." And they're all just standing there watching him as he like shoves his way past them and walks away. Uh, it's a very dramatic episode, very dramatic scene. Good episode. So I would argue that's the biggest argument that I have seen, that like, oh, it's really like a crypto Mormon thing, and I don't buy it.
Yeah.
I think that while it is not expressly biblical, as in the quote did not appear word for word in the Bible, the theology is lowercase o orthodox, and
Right.
it worked dramatically in the scene. So yeah, that's my long exegesis, my review slash exegesis of The Chosen. The season 3 finale is coming soon. I am probably gonna watch it in theaters. Uh, if you have to, I'm going to pull up. John C. Wright has something on his Puss in Boots. He says you got to things on multiple levels, and let me see what he has here. Da-da-da. Yeah, persons, plot, setting, style, and theme. So, persons and plot. Uh, I think that their way of giving distinct personalities to each of the apostles, who are normally a faceless mass, with like Peter and Judas standing out, they do a really good job with it. Like there is, for example, a centurion named Gaius who I am like 99% convinced at this point is going to end up being the good centurion. Uh, because like he has been a major character since the first episode. So
Right.
uh, eventually he's probably going to end up being the good centurion who asked Jesus to heal his servant. Uh, their way of setting up the people of the story is really clever, and
I'll
the
be right back.
characters are complex and interesting. So I would say Persons gets a very high rating. Plot, it's the gospel. It's good. Like, if you like the gospels, you'll like this story. But no, there is more to say there in terms of like pacing, the way that the story is told. I would say that you might be worried that a story like this being told in 7 seasons would drag, and I can assure you that it does not. So in that sense, the plot is a success. The setting, uh, they should consider themselves very thankful that they do get to use the Utah desert for it, because it looks very good. Uh, it looks realistic to first century Judaism. So I will give them that. The style, uh, it is very well shot. The cinematography is mostly excellent, and the theme. And if you were to give like one overarching theme to this, it is how Jesus has shaped the lives of the people he chooses, right? And in that sense, I think that it does a brilliant job of telling these stories in ways that feel really fresh and new. Like the miracle scenes in The Chosen, you're waiting for them, they're coming, and you understand. Like Dallas Jenkins has said, I don't want people to just be watching it for the miracle scenes. But that's the thing, like the setup that he does building to the miracle scenes is really like it helps them stand out in a way that they don't in other adaptations.
Yeah.
you know you're not just waiting for the scene, you're waiting for like the scene with these characters who you now know, who you've seen interacting, who right? Like, and you're seeing how they are affected by what Jesus is doing. Like one of the clever bits of writing in the story is that they have a whole plot line that's running with several characters of a like a the sewers in the town are getting have burst and are mixing with the drinking water, and Rome is not willing to pay for it, so Peter is helping to rebuild the cistern along with the Roman centurion, and this is actually what leads Jairus's daughter to get sick. They spend like multiple episodes just establishing that the water is bad. You know, like this is even how Peter's wife meets the woman with the hemorrhage. They go to a watering hole that's on the other side of town because they can't go to the cistern. Like the way that they connect all of these things is incredibly strong. Like it's a clever bit of writing. Uh, and the theme of how Jesus affects the lives of the people who follow him and who come across him is just really well realized by using that extra time. I think they're using it in a very effective and clever way. So these, in considering all of these standards, I would say that the Chosen, I would rank it above the Ten Commandments. I think it is probably the best Bible adaptation. I think that in terms of things that I would do differently, I do think that there are moments of didactism in the dialogue, though less than there could be. I actually think the dialogue, for the most part, is pretty superb. Uh, the conversations are very engaging, very interesting, very smart, but sometimes you could see that they're pushing a bit more towards a point than they should be. Like Mary Magdalene and the Gentile woman named Tamar have a conversation that feels a little bit too 21st century pop psychology ish to me. Why don't you forgive yourself? Jesus forgave you, type thing. Uh, it's not necessarily bad advice, but it's hard for me to imagine first century Jews and Gentiles having that sort of discussion. Uh, stuff like that. But for the most part, it's excellent. I It's probably my favorite show that's come out in the past. Yeah, if Better Call Saul had 6 seasons, it's probably been like 7 years for Better Call Saul. So in the past 5 years or so, it's my favorite show that's come out, and one of my favorite shows ever. It's certainly, I would say at least in my top 10, if not my top 5.
Nice. Hmm.
You say you have not seen it.
Nope.
You I recommend it.
Hmm. I should. But that would take away time from my many, many important things. Yes.
I'm reading through the comments. Simon Hogwood says typical Roman practicality, really. Uh, I think he is referring to making a Jew a tax collector. I am not sure.
Yeah. I mean, that's what they did. That was their typical MO. Make the people do their own taxes with a guard present or something. It's nothing unusual. They were how do I want to put it, like they didn't care how it happened as long as it happened. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Uh, and then what would happen is, of course, Matthew would add, say 5% off the top. He'd take 2 or 3% for himself, and then he'd pay off his boss with the extra 3%. And that's why all the tax collectors were like rich. You know what I mean? Like they were basically overcharging people for their taxes, and everyone knew it.
Yep. Yeah, Simon Hogwood says specifically a Jew with autism. Yeah, very practical.
This Jew is autistic. Press him into service. He will
Um,
count our money for us.
yeah, Megabuster Shepherd says there's hope for us yet, lads. Based. He also says many branches one tree. Uh, sure. mostly like, yeah, my appreciation is that from what I could tell, I believe Dallas Jenkins when he says that he is not trying to create a partisan type of story. He's trying to create something that is as orthodox as he knows and is able to make, right?
Yes.
Like, and for that, I have a genuine appreciation for the work that he's doing. Uh, Dallas Jenkins too, like, it's interesting because I have not heard like anything with him except for the weird like crypto Mormon accusations, which I don't consider to be uh have any water, hold any water at all.
Yeah.
But outside of that, like, there really hasn't been anything with him. No weird sexual stuff, no weird monetary stuff. Like I said earlier, I expect that we're going to hear something about it one day, though. Like, I would not at all be surprised because The Chosen is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm seeing advertisements for it on like regular television,
Yeah.
and the bigger it becomes, the more it's gonna get people's attention. Then they're gonna be like, "What do we need to do to knock this thing down?" So
Yeah.
don't be surprised if people involved with the show end up like you start seeing scandals pop up.
Yeah.
That's how the devil likes to attack these sorts of things.
And yeah, and there's like there's multiple things to it, like in the real politic, quote unquote, of Hollywood. Like the people who own the land in Hollywood are Quakers, and what they do is they lease it out to Hollywood. So it's like there are, shall we say, many evil forces, and depending on how you consider Quakers, them too. But there's also like the reason why shows like the Ten Commandments get made, why Mel Gibson was even a thing for the Passion of the Christ and whatnot, is that there are people who are like, yeah, it's been 7 years, I want a really good Jesus show, or we're not going to renew your leases. How's that? That sort of
Yeah, the
thing.
thing what makes the chosen different and more resistant, one of the reasons that I'm so like as gung-ho as I am about like, yeah, I am okay with supporting this, is that they're not Hollywood.
Yep.
Like, they're very public about this, like that they are entirely crowd-funded. Now, again, my optimism is tinged with a certain cynicism that something will pop up. I'm not saying that, it's going to remain pristine forever.
Right.
Uh, but there is a sense where it's like you can support if you support the chosen, you're not supporting Hollywood.
Yep.
And that is like that's worth something nowadays.
Yeah.
But yeah, with like Mel Gibson and the Passion of the Christ, Mel Gibson is he is a devout Catholic. He went on some weird drunken rant about Jews. I don't even know. I don't even remember what he said. I don't even remember if he said anything wrong or if he was just like, oh, he mentioned Jews in a way that wasn't entirely positive.
He
You know,
happened to have a
I,
beaver puppet at the time.
what?
A beaver puppet. He happened to have a beaver puppet at the time.
Yeah, I don't remember this. I don't know if he even said anything entirely wrong or not. Like, a lot of the times, like people being anti-Semitic aren't being anti-Semitic at all. They're just not. Much like criticism of black people, like they're just not giving enough deference to the chosen race.
Who we support and love, and Israel, of course, deserves to exist as long as God can keep
Yep, yep. Uh, but
it.
so I don't actually know
you can you can
what Mel
call off the
Gibson spoke
Mossad
like.
snipers. We're
Yes.
anyway. But yeah.
Yeah, it's
Hmm.
I'm thinking at the moment.
Yeah.
So
I'm actually
it's
I am also shocked that it kind of got made just by what everyone's saying about it, and that Christians can actually watch this. Um, it's not something that happens every day.
yeah, part of the shock is just how good it is. It's
Yeah.
like, making a Jesus project is one thing. Making a sorry, making a Jesus project with good writing and excellent acting is something else entirely. But they did it. Like, if anything, I would argue acting is probably like the single strongest aspect of the show. Like, the actors are superb. Uh,
Mm.
and it's one of those things. It's like I am amazed that I am genuinely amazed that this exists, but how long until we hear something? This is one of those things too. I'm also going to kind of give this like as a warning to listeners. It's like when you hear of scandals among people you respect or the church or whatever, do not be discouraged.
Yep.
Do not be afraid. Yeah. Uh the devil is hunting all of us, and he goes after those who serve Christ harder than most. With that said, you need to remember that for all of like, and I'm talking about I mean from the Catholic abuse crisis to the Protestant grifters out there, right, all across the board,
Yep.
comparative to the general population, it is a drop in the bucket,
Yep.
and you have to remember that people are being dishonest.
Yep.
Like, compare the abuse crisis to the public school abuse crisis. Like, oh, but that's a 2 K. No, I'm making a specific point. Like, I'm not excusing it. What I am saying is, when people use this to discredit the church, they are they are not being honest. When people talk about, Protestant pastor grifters who are out there, and there are many,
There are.
but when
It's
you
easy.
compare it to what's going on in big business, you know, it's nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. If you didn't expect to find sinners in the church, then you weren't paying enough attention when you were reading your Bible.
Yep.
Like, this was going to happen. And it will happen with, I would not be surprised at least. Maybe they'll avoid it. Who knows? But I would not be surprised to see some sort of scandal come out with somebody in The Chosen. If it's not Dallas Jenkins, who is the creator, then it might end up being one of like the actors or the people involved, right? Like it
Yep.
comes out that they were part of something weird or freaky. Don't be surprised by this. Don't be discouraged by this, and don't drop your support as a result. Now, do drop your support if it turns out that like Dallas Jenkins is like funding a pedophile ring or something. But which, yeah, like then okay, yeah, but don't drop your support just because you learned that people on your side aren't perfect. There is a difference
Yep.
between the two, right? That's the difference with like Mel Brooks. People abandoned Mel Brooks, which was honestly unconscionable. He gave a drunken rant. Like,
Mel Gibson.
yeah, Mel Gibson. Like, who cares? He also created the biggest Christ-centered film of the past 20 years, probably converted thousands of people with that movie. Uh,
Yep.
I know of people who were converted by that film. Like, I'm not even really that fond of it, to be honest with you. But I know, not directly, like, not myself, but I know of people, who were converted by the Passion of the Christ, who found the Passion of the Christ to be so moving that, like, it got them back involved in the church and in Christianity, like, yeah, Megabuster Shepherd says a church scandal, a day that ends in Y. Right, but my point is that just because you see those scandals, you got to remember that the way that they're presented, people are trying to make you lose your faith,
Yep.
right? Like, they are trying to make you lose heart in the church. But you're going to realize when you go to the secular world, it is not better. It is worse.
Yep.
It is so much worse.
Oh yeah, and it's like it's kind of a choose your poison kind of thing. So you have things like the sex abuse scandals, but but like I'm in a workplace, right? There's me and a couple other guys, and several of us have offhandedly mentioned, having lives of friends or our own lives, not me in this case, ruined by drugs. And like, so five guys, three of them that I know of specifically for sure Actually, I'll put in a fourth one, even though he pulled himself out of it. Um, you know, have have had dealt with either with friends or with themselves some severe drug problems. Um, there's and that's just because the fifth guy hates me and doesn't tell me about his life. So it's like, I don't know about him. He probably has his own thing going on. So it's like that. Like you have a small workspace, five guys. All five of them can say, "Yeah, I've lost a best friend," or "I came out of drugs." I was that best friend who was lost to drugs. And I came out. And and that's in a very Christian part of the nation. Um, I talked to a guy who I don't think he fantasizes, but he talks about, I just, he hates his local heroin dealers. He knows who they are. He knows the lives they ruin. He lost a good friend. I've lost good friends to it. That's drugs. Alcoholism. I work a bar as a doorman, a bouncer. And, you know, I had a girl, turn maudlin in her cups. And she's like crying in my chair. So I couldn't sit down. That was rude. And some guy bumps into another guy. He's like, "Oof, I feel like I've been throat punched." And she goes, "Oh, I wish someone would throat punch me." I'm like, "Oh, you'll get over it," and stuff like that. Like the things that you see in non-Christian circles account for everyone in some way. Sometimes it's not even, alcohol or drugs or whatever. It's their anger issue they won't deal with, or greed, or um, vengeance and stuff like that. Like there's a thousand little things that non Christians have that sort of grow into it. And quite frankly, most of them don't use those flaws to make themselves great or anything like that. They're not living up to their worldly potential. I think very few people even understand that there's more to it than just the day by day, even if they say things to themselves or others. Like it's there's no self reflection. I believe that to be Christian, you have to have a certain amount of self reflection, at least to accept your sin nature. There's so much to it that goes underneath that forces you to look at your life and say, do I want to continue moving on the path that has been set before me, the path to hell? Because quite frankly, no one in America has any excuse not to know the gospel. It is
Mm-hmm.
everywhere, all over the place. A lot of people don't know what it is, but they still know Jesus is a thing and Christianity is a thing, if only because they see the church steeples. So there's, all the lost people that you see are almost guaranteed to be worse off than you. The problem is that Satan protects the useful of his own. It's like recently I saw on Vox's blog, a police chief in England, part of the usual sort of ring, is dead, mysteriously. Who probably a wink suicide, and it's like that. Like they're useful until they're not, and then they're destroyed.
Yep.
And that goes through throughout all society. You know, just look at the people trying to hold on to the prime minister's spot. See the person who trying to hold on to power in the United States government. I have a cousin in that, and he can't even engage in me in anything other than fake politeness. These aren't happy people. They're miserable, but they hate us for because we have Christ. They really hate Christ. They don't even really think about us at all. Um,
Yep.
yeah.
So Carl Philip Gabler has a question that I am tempted to mock, but I won't because it is a legitimate question,
You
to be
better
honest.
not. He pays money,
Yeah, that's
Anthony.
true. But I won't because it is a legitimate question.
All
Although
right.
He says, "What do you think of the Protestant idea that portraying Jesus in biblical stories is dangerous? Like, a lot of the details they've filled in are not canned at all. The idea being, since the Matthew was autistic thing was made up, it could influence people towards made up ideas and away from considering what's in the text. So, as much as I want to mock it, I actually do think that is a legitimate question. So, I'll say a few things. First, to be clear here, when we call it the Protestant idea, it is a certain sect of Protestantism. Dallas Jenkins is an evangelical, so clearly it's not him. Uh,
So
and
I will say that it is a belief that I hold to a point. Like I'm more subtle with it, but I want you to say like the Catholic perspective first because it was kind of directed at you.
yep, yep. So, with that said, I actually do think that there is something of a concern there. And what I mean is this: the chosen should never be used, and I think Dallas Jenkins would say this, at least I hope he would, though I haven't asked him, but he's pretty clear. Like, he's pretty clearly sincere in his faith, so I think he would say this. Yeah, the chosen is not a substitute for the Gospels, and
Yeah.
you should not use the chosen as a substitute for the Gospels. There is not a choice between watching The Chosen and reading the Gospels. It is not either or. It's not even both and. Because if there is a choice, then the choice is pretty clear, which is read the actual Gospels. The
Yep.
Chosen should be viewed as uh, first a work of fiction. It is a work of fiction that is based on real events, but a work of fiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Matthew being autistic, as you pointed out, it is not in the text. There is almost nothing about Matthew in the text.
Yep.
It doesn't contradict the text, but it is not in the text. You shouldn't be leaving the chosen and now from now on thinking of Matthew as an autistic person.
Yep.
Now, is that a danger? I think it can be if you are not watching the show with the proper mindset. If you are watching the show instead of reading the gospel, and if you are watching the show thinking of it as, a documentary or like a portrayal of what happened, you're going to fall into that trap. And there's also the note that there are certain people who are more prone to certain things than others. John C. Wright has correctly talked about this.
Yep.
I've heard of exorcists who have cautioned against Harry Potter, but I've also heard of occultists who got into the occult through The Lord of the Rings. John C. Wright is saying, in both cases, I don't think that the people who are saying this are being insincere. I think that they were people who are more prone to this sort of thing, so it would be a near occasion of sin for them to read Harry Potter or The Lord of the Rings. Now, whatever you think of Harry Potter, I'm talking about specifically its witchcraft value, which I think, like, it's none. There is no witchcraft value in Harry Potter from a practical perspective. But if you are the sort of person who is prone to that temptation, right, of
Yep.
being drawn to things like witchcraft, then Harry Potter and The Lord of the Rings might be dangerous to you. I would say the same thing with The Chosen. If you are the sort of person who is prone to the temptation of getting overly attached to works of fiction, right, or getting
Mm-hmm.
overly invested in fiction, then The Chosen might not be the sort of thing you should watch. But I don't think that means that it shouldn't exist. And I do think that for most people who can make those distinctions, The Chosen would be something that is acceptable. Does that? I hope that that is a good answer.
I think it is a good answer. Um, I'll put in a different one, uh, but the same sort of spirit to it. Uh, in many churches, they have a church pageant. Sometimes they have people play acting scenes from Jesus' life, the Bible in general, that sort of thing. Most of the time, well, I don't know. I'll say it more like this: there's good chances that someone involved uh, is not in the right spirit. I'll put it like that. And sometimes people, and it could be as simple as the music director who's organizing it is just too into it. He is he's giving 110% where he should not be putting 110%. It's about him, not about the gospel. So you have that
Right.
situation. Then you have situations like, you know, it's bad. It's really bad. It is so bad and cringeworthy that you need to not have it. Like you should just say nope. You guys are not doing it. You're barely putting in any effort into it. We're canceling it. Then there's the one that's actually dangerous. Because quite frankly, the music director, no matter how much of himself, he's pouring into too much, when it's over, it's over. Like he's done. You can talk to him about it the next year, and next year is going to be better probably if he's a proper person about it. But then you have people who go, well, he plays Jesus every year. Oh, well, we want to do it, because this, we're so important to the church. Do you get what I'm saying? Like it's not about, the portrayal, it's about self-aggrandizement in the place of Jesus Christ. As in, you are putting yourself in the place of Jesus Christ. There was a family in one of my older churches that I went to where there was this family, very ungodly, um, but they exerted a lot of pressure over the pastor who honestly could never really get church politics right. And I'm not saying politics like, ooh, you got to keep a balance between these facts. No, like the pastor's the boss. The pastor's the head of the church, as Christ is the head of the overall church, and so on and so forth. Um, and he could never really put them in their place, which they needed. So they were made a nuisance of themselves many times. The son of the mother was a narcissist. He harassed my sister for a little bit. So there's a little bit of personal beef going on there, but it really wasn't that much because my sister could put down men very well. It was just very awkward for us. And then you're sitting there, that this man playing Jesus does not have a servant's heart about it, does not have a humble heart about it. And instead, he is using it to show off, his holiness or to imply his holiness. He's saved because he played Jesus in the church pageant. That sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because people are very irrational in general. He was of the type to absolutely believe what he was doing made himself a good person or gave him power in the church or was an exercise of that power over the church. Um, so, in that specific situation, which I know of in many other churches, especially Protestant churches, you have people who take the spirit of what they have, of what they live, and use it to squash the spirit of others or interfere with them. So the danger isn't in necessarily a badly written play, bad music, or anything like that. That's just you being stuck in a seat, clapping as Miss, whatever, Mrs. Whatever shuffles over to play her piano solo, in between, um, scenes, and you're just waiting for time because you're hungry or something. Like it's like that. But then when you know the backgrounds of the people and you know that they're not doing their best, that they're doing it because they put pressure on the pastor, that they use it for power over other parishioners, other people in the pews, it destroys and sickens even what little good could be gotten from a lovely evening singing carols with interludes of bad stagecraft. So I think like I personally do not like representations of Jesus, even in most art. You know, I think that most of the time, uh, people might not have the right view of it, or the person hiring it out might not have the right view of it. But it is especially guaranteed to be bad with the more people you have. Like the guy who played Jesus Christ Superstar, I don't think he's a Christian. He might be now, but I don't think he was a Christian when he did that mockery. Um, there are other ones, that I've seen where it's like, making fun of Jesus. We were making fun of the Jesus beating up on Rick memes that come out there, but I don't think his voice actor was Christian in any sort of way. Um, you know, like there was another show where uh, it was the Smiling Friends or something, and the guy goes through hell and, helps Satan find a new view on life because he died, and that was the way he was going to come back to life. And then God's played by whatever his name is who played Iago, and he's sent back to Earth, thrown like a fastball. It's actually very funny scene, but blasphemous. It smells blasphemous. And then it ends with a Jewish actor who's talking about it, and he's going, that's right. Any questions, children? As he's like closing the storybook, and one of the kids is like, wait a minute, the Christians are right. That's right, the Christians are right. Have a good Christmas, everybody. And it goes on with the rest of the show. Like there's while we use it as a sort of like, ha ha, ironic mockery sort of thing, they mean it as a blasphemous mockery. And that's just the stuff that you are likely to know. This stuff has been happening since the 1970s. There's the piss Christ, a crucifix and a giant bottle of piss. Like it's blasphemous. It makes me angry. And that stuff isn't meant with a little bit of tongue in cheek, with a wink and a nod, and it's not meant under somebody's narcissistic delusion. It is a direct insult, veiled in postmodern art BS speak, and not just and not just stuff like that. That's quote unquote high art. There's a lot of low art of it, and it does come out in every way you can imagine. I'm sure that, I know for sure that the guy who ran most of the porn networks in the 70s and did most of the work to make it legal explicitly hated Catholics. I think he hated all Christians, but he had the most interactions with Catholics, so he breathed the most threats against Catholics. His work did the most to hurt Catholic hegemony. Like there's, like the Mormon critique. I don't know enough about it to say anything about it, but if there is one, Mormons are a cult and a serious heresy. Um, they are so easy to debunk when you actually like even know a little bit of scripture that it's not even funny. Especially since I have been at
So
the. Sorry,
yeah,
hold on. Let me.
Mormonism's dangerous. Go ahead.
Yes, but to finish my point here, um, the proof will be in how they treat Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, and whether or not they quote him, and Paul, I guess as well, if he's going that far, um, and how they should treat false teachers. I think since the fella is an evangelical, he will put that stuff in there because it is an important message to have out and to remind people. But
We'll
Mormonism
see.
is insidious, and they might go except for Joseph Smith, wink, fade to black, and it's like no man.
Honestly, that would be so ballsy that it would actually kind of cross over to me into like I'd be impressed.
Yeah.
Like they just cross over and go, and then my people, like the very last scene of the show, as Jesus ascending into heaven, and then my people will go to America, and they will start the Mormon Church, and then you just end the show, roll credits. It would be horrible, but it would be like so ballsy. I would be kind of low key impressed with it. Uh, Carl Philip Gadler says, "What do you think about the idea that if you portray Jesus as light skinned, you are literally doing white supremacy? You can mock this one. What's there to say? It's retarded." Uh,
I mean, he was light skinned. Like, it's. Well, he was. Okay, let me rephrase. He was very likely to be very tan from working out in the sun, since it's assumed that he was working as, his father's apprentice in his young life. Um, but, the genetics for those century of Jews were pretty clear. They weren't like white, but they were a lot light skinned than I think people give them credit for.
yeah,
Especially since the idea that they were Arabian or even dark skinned is countered quite a few times, both by genetics and by offhanded comments in scripture. The children of Ham, comments were taken quite literally by the Jews, who viewed themselves as only a few generations off from Noah. Well, I don't know about a few, but like they still knew the roles from Noah to Abraham, the generations. So it's like the meme of the guy smiling at the pyramids, and he's like white, blue-eyed, white, yellow hair. Like that was yeah. That that's actually kind of close to what the Hyksos look like, if I recall correctly. But it wasn't what the average Egyptian looked like. They were kind of red skinned and they had black hair. Um, their genetics are very clear. The reason why they don't like to let people look at Pharaoh's genetics is that sometimes they were conquered by people outside Egypt, and that's a severe loss of face. And I want to be clear, they weren't conquered by Nubians. They were conquered by the Hyksos and other chariot riding Aryan tribes. Uh, and or the Greeks or others. And they had tons of interracial marriage to secure alliances. So it's you can't like except under certain circumstances which are already accounted for within the genealogy of Pharaoh that we know what they look like for any given one. We just have to be honest about what the Hyksos look like or what the Greeks look like. And the same with the people in the Levant. The Arabians who live there now, who I want to be clear, wiped out, I don't want to say genocided, but they wiped out or interbred with just about everyone and everything in there. Um, changed the genetic and physiognometry of the area. And it's not what so like you can't even go back like even if you went back 1,000 years 1,500 years they would be a completely different person post and pre Muslim invasion in the 600s and change. um,
mhm.
that sort of thing. Like if somebody's like, "Oh, Jesus wasn't white," well, we wouldn't call him white like European. We wouldn't imply that he's European, but he was, he wasn't dark skinned or anything like that. We wouldn't, um, you wouldn't cross the other side of the street if you saw him, like your average liberal does. So it's, and I'm not implying that they would cross the street because he's Jesus. I'm implying that they cross the street because he's black, because they're racist. But it's like it's one of those things where it's like they use it to confuse people. It's not an actual concern they have. It's a bludgeon to keep the Christian and by proxy the white man down. Um, yeah, that's the long and
Yep.
short of it. You know,
Uh, Mega Mr. Shepard says Jesus was of the 11. We know what they look like. They exist now. It's obvious what he looked like. I'll go a step further and say we have the Shroud of Turin.
yep,
Uh, the Shroud of Turin, we had this discussion last week. Well, it hasn't been like ironclad proven. It has been very, very, very strongly. There are very strong indicators that it is authentic. And looking at the face on the Shroud of Turin, uh, it is remarkable how much it looks like, the quote unquote stereotypical Jesus face.
Yep.
Like it actually, that was actually legitimately, this was one of the issues, to be honest with you, with the Shroud of Turin, is that it looks so much like the stereotypical face of Jesus that's been used in art through the centuries. That was one of the reasons people thought surely this must be a hoax. Like, like
Yep.
legitimately, this was a real thing where people were like, "Come on, that looks exactly like you would imagine Jesus to look.
Yeah.
What are the chances of this being real?"
Very good,
And they're
actually.
like, "I don't know what to tell you, man." So the answer to the question is, yeah, we do know more or less. The Shroud of Turin, like, to be clear, it hasn't been proven beyond all doubt because the dating hasn't been authenticated, but all signs point to it being authentic, and I mean all signs. Like, there isn't even anything that would point it away from it being authentic.
Yep.
The odds of it being authentic are very, very high. And going by the Shroud of Turin, and reconstructing the face seen in the shroud, which we can do with some accuracy,
Yep.
it looks like you would imagine Jesus to look with the beard and everything.
Yep.
I find that very amusing.
Eh,
Almost like a cosmic prank of God. Just medieval artists happen to be drawing Jesus pretty much dead on. And for no real reason, just randomly.
Yep. And
Anyway,
I think that's, I think that's kind of just fine. Like, if he happens to look like that, fine. The image of Jesus, uh, well, the race of Jesus actually matters quite a bit, because he is of the race of and line of David. Um, but
well,
it's just,
yes.
you
He's
know, it doesn't matter as much for salvation, whether he had a beard or not or anything else. But I am glad that Leonardo da Vinci and others are accurate. Um,
It just
yeah.
amuses me. It feels like a cosmic prank. Like these medieval and Renaissance artists were just drawing a bearded white guy, and then it turns out that's exactly what Jesus actually looked like.
But the thing is that, like, people were aware of what Jesus looked like to a point. Since there is a fairly decent unbroken uh, uh, sort of set of traditions and whatnot that
Yeah, the fact that he's called a Nazarene, I'm pretty sure has been implied. Like I've heard both things. I've heard people go Jesus would be clean shaven because Jews shaved, and I have heard Jesus is a Nazarene and Nazarenes had a vow not to cut their hair. And it appears, going by the Shroud of Turin, that the latter was probably true. Uh,
yep,
Now, just because in the Shroud of Turin he is bearded.
yep,
Now, I will note that in The Chosen, like, they give all of the Jews beards, which is probably wrong, but, well, you want everything.
yeah. And quite frankly, Jews without beards sounds weird.
Yeah,
It just
it's
does.
true. I suppose, though, it is true, like, if you really want to get technical about it, unless you took a vow not to shave your hair, they would probably be shaven.
Yeah.
But those are the sorts of details I'm not going to sweat.
No, it's important. We have to split the church over this immediately.
Portal Mitchell says, "Hello, people. Hello to you, but we're
Hello,
leaving now,
sir.
so bye."
Yes. Unfortunately, it is true. I am fairly out of things to say. Uh, sounds like The Chosen's pretty good. I should certainly watch it. I
Give it a
really
shot.
should.
See if you'll enjoy it.
Uh, well, guys, I'll give you guys a taste of what's to come. I will be having a guest. Mongoose and Meerkat is entering their third and final set um, uh, for their uh, for their series. So we'll be pimping out that book, making sure it's earning that money. Gotta make money on these here streets. Then also, I have a few things in the future, and I'm sure Anthony will too. Though I might not be here for Mardi Gras because I am going to work the door and get paid. But we'll see. We'll see how that turns out. How about you, Anthony? Anything coming up?
Anything coming up? Well, let's see. Uh, I keep mentioning this and I keep forgetting, but I'm gonna keep mentioning this to remind myself. If you remember, we were gonna have Gospel Simplicity on, and then he got sick. I need to contact him again and hopefully get him on. I love his channel; it's fantastic. He's a cool guy.
You're just
I
saying
feel
it.
like he would be a very interesting guest to have for a Protestant versus Catholic stuff, because he is a Protestant who was investigating, the other Christian churches, the Orthodox and Catholic churches, in a very respectful and very, I guess, nuanced would be the way to put it, nuanced way that I appreciated. And just getting his perspective on our whole discussion, I think, would be very interesting and fun.
He can't just hate the Pope like an average noble Protestant.
Yeah, you can't. All the Protestants just are ashamed of him because it's like, ew, you said that you didn't say you hate the Pope. But no, he from what I could tell, he seems fairly popular.
I'd love
Uh,
to have him on. Hmm.
I just need to. I'm mentioning this to remind myself to contact him again.
Yeah. All right. Well, talk to you all later.